64% of Americans are more afraid of running out of money than dying. Allianz Life 2025. Her name is Diane, 58. Coventry or Columbus, doesn't matter. The second you hear her story, you'll know her. You might be her. 34 years as a school administrator. Showed up before everyone else, left after everyone else. When colleagues called in sick, she covered. When parents needed answers at 7 p.m., she picked up. She did everything they told her to do. Last Tuesday, she opened a retirement calculator on her laptop, typed in her numbers, hit calculate, and stared at the screen. The number she was supposed to have. She didn't have it, wasn't close, she didn't cry. She closed the laptop, made another cup of tea, and went to work. The typical worker has under $1,000 saved for retirement. The recommended amount, $1.5 million. CBS News/National Institute on Retirement Security, 2025. Last month, someone posted on Reddit, "Confession time, I'm almost 49. I have zero retirement savings, no exaggeration, absolutely nothing, and I know I can't be the only one." Thousands replied, not with judgment, with same. This film is about why that keeps happening. Not to people who made bad decisions, but to people who made all the right ones. Because once you understand what actually broke and why, you stop carrying guilt that was never yours to carry, and you start building something that actually works. Part 1. The script everyone inherited. The plan wasn't invented by anyone. It was inherited, passed down quietly, confidently, as though it were fact. Go to school, work hard, get a stable job, save what you can, buy a house, retire at 65, and here's what matters, it wasn't entirely wrong. Hard work matters, saving matters, stability matters. These are real. The problem was 3 words nobody questioned. This is enough. In 1970, a US worker could buy an average home with 4.4 years of salary. One income covered a family, a teacher, a council worker, a factory supervisor. They could own something, raise children, and retire without catastrophe. The plan wasn't updated when those numbers changed, it was just handed to the next generation, and the one after that, same script, different economy, completely different result. Part 2. The ground shifted under everyone. For 30 years after World War II, when workers produced more, they earned more. Productivity and wages moved together. That relationship is what made middle-class life possible. It's why one's salary stretched. It's why saving monthly actually built something. Then that relationship quietly ended. Workers kept producing more, they just stopped getting it back, and then the safety nets came down. Employer pensions, the kind that guaranteed a retirement income for life, began disappearing from the private sector. No announcement, just a quiet transfer of risk. They didn't take away the promise of retirement, they just made it your problem to deliver it. And on top of that, UK tuition fees went from $0 to £9,250 a year. US student debt crossed $1.7 trillion. American healthcare premiums rose over 300% between 2000 and 2024. While wages rose 120%, the plan assumed the basics would stay affordable. When they didn't, the plan stopped working. Not because people failed, but because the plan was built for a world that no longer existed. Part 3. The number that lies to you. Jamie is 26, first real job. Manchester marketing coordinator, £32,000. He calls his mum, she's proud, he thinks, I can make this work. Then the first pay slip arrives. After tax, national insurance, student loan, and pension contributions, he takes home £2,100 a month. Rent, £950. Travel, £160. Food, phone, subscriptions, £400. He has £590 left. Before anything goes wrong, that gap between the number you announce and the money that actually arrives is one of the most disorienting facts of adult life. People plan on the gross. They live on the net, Nobody prepares you for that. Then the raise disappears. 3 years later, Jamie earns £38,000, moves somewhere nicer, gets a car,
And the
upgrades
camera
his
quality
phone,
is much better for
takes
your
a
travels,
real
sir.
holiday. He deserves it. 3 months later, the raise is gone, absorbed completely into the new shape of his life. Behavioral economists call this hedonic adaptation. The brain adjusts to improvement almost immediately and recalibrates upward. It's not weakness, it's wiring, and the entire consumer economy is engineered around it. The moment your income rises, 12 industries are already waiting to capture it. Jamie isn't bad with money. He's doing exactly what the environment is designed to make him do. Spend first, save what's left. What's left is nothing. Part 4. The ceiling you don't see until you hit it. Marcus is 41. Project manager, London, £72,000. His wife earns £48,000. Together, £120,000. They should be fine. They look fine. Mortgage, £2,400. 2 kids in childcare, £2,100. Car. Loan. A credit card that climbs back up every time it gets paid down. They have £800 left between them at the end of the month. Nothing was saved in 2 years. Marcus isn't reckless. He is someone who earned more and watched his obligations expand to meet every penny of it. Here's what nobody says out loud. There is a hard ceiling on how much you can earn by selling your time. You can't work more than 24 hours a day. You can raise the price of your hour through skills, promotions, and reputation, but the mechanism never changes. Stop working, stop earning. The income doesn't compound, it resets every 30 days. That is not a personal failing, it is a structural limit. And the people who quietly escape it understand one thing differently: the difference between selling time and owning something. Part 5. 2 worlds, 1 choice. 2 financial worlds run side by side. Most people only ever live in one. The first runs on income. You show up, you produce, you get paid. Stop showing up, it stops. Honest, dignified, and it has a ceiling built into the hours of the day. The second runs on ownership. Something generates value whether you're present or not. Shares that keep growing. A rental, a business that runs without you at the center. It works while you sleep. It works when you're sick. It works at 68. The wealthy are not, in most cases, more talented. They are structurally positioned in the second world, while most people spend their entire lives trying to build security in the first. That is not a gap in effort, it is a gap in ownership, and the tax code reinforces it. Money you earn by showing up is taxed harder than money you earn by owning something. Not a conspiracy. A structural choice made deliberately over decades, and it compounds. What is the starting point then? Not a portfolio, not a property empire, one index fund, a stocks and shares ISA, or a Roth IRA. £200 a month, on payday, automated, before the decision to spend it can even form. That is the crack in the door. That 30-year compounding number is not a sales pitch. It is time, doing its work, without being interrupted. If the path is this clear, buffer, automate, invest, own something, why do millions of people not do it? Ask that out loud, and you immediately hear how it sounds if you've ever been one bill away from disaster. Priya is 33, an NHS administrator in Birmingham. Her salary is £31,000, single mom, 7-year-old son. Every month, rent, wraparound childcare, car insurance, council tax, and phone. Most months, she reaches the last week with under £200. She knows she should be saving. She knows the same way you know you should exercise more. It's not information she's missing, it's margin. Without margin, there is no room to build. Every time she gets £50 ahead, something erases it. A bill, a price rise, a week with fewer hours. When 87% of British adults name the cost of living as a top national concern, that is not a personal finance problem wearing a systemic costume. It is a systemic problem wearing a personal finance costume. And then there's the psychology. beyond the money, there's a force that keeps people frozen. Behavioral economists call it loss aversion. The pain of a potential loss registers at roughly twice the intensity of an equivalent gain. In practice, the fear of getting it wrong account, wrong timing, wrong choice, is psychologically stronger than the pull of building something better. So people wait, they research, they tell themselves they'll start when things settle down. Things never settle down. And then there's the social trap. In a world of visible spending, Instagram kitchens, holiday posts, cars on driveways, choosing not to spend looks identical to not being able to. The person who keeps their old phone and puts the money in an ISA doesn't look disciplined. They look like they can't afford a new phone. The social cost of long-term thinking is real, it's exhausting, and it is rarely acknowledged by the people writing "just save more" columns. None of these excuses for inaction, but it is the actual terrain, and you cannot build a route through terrain you refuse to see. David and Helen, Bristol, 44. Combined income, £95,000. Own a house or 40% of one. 2 cars, 2 kids in secondary school. A proper holiday each year. From the outside, success. But they cannot miss 2 months of income without serious trouble. 1 income stream, 1 lever, 1 point of failure. If David's company restructures, which it has done twice already, everything depends on how quickly he finds another job. This is the middle-class loop, and it catches people not when they're struggling, but precisely when things feel fine. Income rises, lifestyle rises to match, fixed costs accumulate, mortgage, car finance, insurance, and school. Income rises again, costs rise again. From inside, progress. From outside, success. The underlying vulnerability never changes. David and Helen built a lifestyle, not wealth. A lifestyle collapses when the income stops. Wealth keeps producing when you can't. The loop is hardest to break when things feel fine, because when things feel fine, there's no urgency. There's always next year. Next year is how the loop survives. Not the fantasy version, the real one. The one Diane, Jamie, Priya, David and Helen can actually use. Step 1. Build the floor. Not investing, not stocks. A buffer. 3 months of essential expenses somewhere accessible. This converts the next emergency from a catastrophe that destroys 12 months of progress into something you absorb and move past. Without this, every strategy fails eventually. Not because the strategy is wrong, but because one boiler, one bill, one reduced paycheck destroys it. Floor first, everything else on top of it. Step 2. Remove the decision. Research on saving behavior is consistent across decades. Willpower is an unreliable mechanism. People who save what's left at the end of the month save significantly less than people who automate a fixed amount on payday before they can decide to spend it. Removing the choice is more powerful than resolving. UK employer pension to get the full match, then a stocks and shares ISA, US 401k to the match, then a Roth IRA, not optional upgrades, infrastructure. Pay the future version of yourself first, automate it, live on the rest of it. Step 3. Stop letting every raise disappear. Every pay increase does not have to become a new monthly commitment. Routing half of every raise, or even a third, into assets rather than lifestyle is the structural difference between 2 otherwise identical workers at 55. One has obligations that match their income. The other has income that no longer requires their presence. Let something compound while the rest improves your life. Step 4. Build one thing that earns without you. A dividend-paying portfolio built over the years. A property bought gradually. A small business is systematized enough to run without you at the center. A digital product. The form matters less than the principle. At some point, you need something earning that doesn't stop when you do. The test. If your income stopped tomorrow, how long could you manage? Under 3 months, that's your answer. Step 5. Think in the right unit of time. Compound growth is psychologically brutal in the early years. The numbers feel insultingly small. After 10 years, they feel real. After 20, they change things. After 30, they change lives. The curve doesn't reward the smartest person. It rewards the one who started earliest and didn't stop. That is the entire mechanism. 18 to 28. You have the one thing money can't buy back. You are not behind. You are standing at the entrance to the largest compounding window of your life, and most people your age don't know it yet. The most important financial decision you'll make is not which stock to pick. It's starting the habit before you feel ready. £50 a month, $100. The amount is almost irrelevant. A habit started at 22, compounded over 40 years, becomes the difference between two completely different lives. Enjoy your 20s fully and invest 10% of everything you earn automatically from day one. These are not in conflict. 29 to 45. The loop closes tightest here. You earn more than ever before. Your obligations are the highest they've ever been. The pressure to look like you've arrived is real, relentless, and expensive. Honest question, if your income stopped tomorrow, how long could your life continue? In less than 3 months, the priority isn't a better investment strategy, it's margin. Like Priya, like Marcus. The move isn't a hustle, it's a structural reduction of vulnerability, one decision at a time. 46 to 60. The window hasn't closed, it's narrowed. Different thing. A 50-year-old investing consistently for 15 years ends up somewhere genuinely different from a 50-year-old who decides it's too late. The window is narrower, it is not closed. Also, cut fixed obligations. Every monthly commitment you can eliminate is a margin working in your favor now. The debt costing 19% interest is a 19% guaranteed return when it's gone. 61 and beyond. You didn't fail. The plan was incomplete. That is not the same thing. Honest accounting of what you have, what you need, and the real gap. Part-time income, downsizing, benefits you're entitled to but haven't claimed. Family conversations you've been avoiding. These aren't failures, they're the tools of a generation handed a broken map, who navigated further with it than anyone had the right to ask. We come back to Diane. She closed her laptop that Tuesday and went to work. She didn't spiral. She went to work because that's who she is, and because that consistency, that quiet reliability, is one of the genuinely good things in this world. It is not what failed her. In the United States today, the bottom 50% of the population holds 2.5% of total national wealth. The top 1% holds nearly 32%, the highest share ever recorded. In the UK, the top 10% hold half of all household wealth. Those numbers are not the result of the bottom half working less hard. They are the accumulated outcome of a system built through decades of policy, legislation, and tax code to compound the advantage of ownership over the return of labor. And 64% of Americans are now more afraid of running out of money than dying. That isn't a statistic. That's a measure of how many people feel the ground shifting beneath them and can't see how to steady it. But it can be steadied, not overnight, not without difficulty, by understanding the system clearly enough to build inside it, by automating before spending, by breaking the raise cycle once instead of never, by building, slowly without drama, one thing that earns independence from you. The people who escape the loop are not uniquely brilliant, not luckier. They made one shift from selling time to building ownership. And then they stayed in long enough for time to do what time does. That is the whole thing. The difference between surviving the plan they gave you and finally building your own.